So I am back. We are going forward in time, and we are going to the 1700s because I'm going to read to you more of Richard Pococke's Volume 1 Observations on Egypt from his publication, A Description of the East and Some Other Countries. So I got this book off of Abe Books, which is another site that I heartily recommend to get inexpensive books on Egypt, including travel accounts. And the sub company within Abe Books that I ordered the Description of the East through is Forgotten Books. So, again, we're doing Volume 1, A Description of the East and Some Other Countries by Richard Pococke, who made at least 2 trips to Egypt in the second half of the 1700s. So I've skipped ahead a little bit in my print copy, and so I'm on Chapter 2, and this is describing Mr. Pococke's journey by boat from Alexandria to Roseto and the city of Cairo, as it was in the second half of that 1700s. And again, because this travel account is older, there might be some words that I'm not 100% sure what they are. So I'll probably stumble every once in a while. On the 24th of October, we set out from Alexandria to Roseto, and leaving Bickery on the left hand about a league, we came to the Medea or ferry, about 2 leagues from Bickery. The passage is over the outlet of a lake that is supposed to have been the lower part of the canopic branch of the Nile, as this ferry close by the sea must have been the mouth of it. Herculaneum was probably somewhere near, from which it was also called the Herculaneum branch. Canopus, I suppose, to have been higher up this river, probably about the place where the canal went out of it. This place was famous for the dissolute manner in which the Alexandrians diverted themselves there, as well as in many other places along the canal that led to it. Now I'm skipping ahead a little bit. On the other side of this ferry is a cane where passengers repose and think themselves safe from the Arabs, who rarely go to that side. All the country here is a sandy desert. It might be otherwise when this branch of the Nile annually overflowed, but there being a ridge of low sandy hills running from north to south near the Nile, it is possible that the fruitful soil may have been covered with the sand blown from those hills. It might, however, be a curious experiment to dig and see if any such soil is to be found as is usually brought by the Nile. The land changes so often that it would be difficult to find the way if they had not built 11 pillars across the plain, which I conjectured might be about half a mile apart, in order to direct the way, which otherwise it would be difficult to find at such times, as the wind raises great clouds of sand, as it often does in Egypt. At one of those pillars an arch is turned, and an earthen vase is placed under it, which by some charity is kept full of Nile water for the benefit of travelers. In this journey I had the honor to accompany the English consul, who was met by his vice-consul of Roseto, as also by many of the French, above a league from that town. When we were come within the sandy hills, we were surprised at the sight of a magnificent tent, where a handsome collation was prepared. After this refreshment, we were all mounted on fine horses, sent out by the governor of the city, each attended by a groom on foot, and so arrived at Roseto. The next morning, the governor sent a present of sheep and fowl to the consul, which I suppose was returned by something of much greater value. And then he goes on to talk a little bit more about where Roseto was and sort of the geography of it. And so now I'm skipping ahead a little bit where he talks about some of the mysteries of the Nile and its branches that there were in kind of that second half of the 1700s. So by the time that Pococke wrote, people had found out, Westerners had found out a little bit more about the Nile, but a lot of mysteries as to its origin and kind of how things worked there were definitely still existing. There is great difficulty in settling the ancient branches of the Nile after its division into 7 parts, when it runs through that part of Egypt which was called Delta, by reason that many of them have been filled up for want of being cleaned, and the maps that have been made of those parts are not entirely to be depended upon. So I thought that just was an interesting passage, and the mention of maps is interesting because it sort of alludes to that Western exploration that had been going on through a lot of the 1700s, and kind of the mapping of Egypt's geography that had started to trickle out and sort of begun to be acquired by Western hands. And so now he's talking about his journey to Cairo and sort of what sailing there was like, kind of the particular type of ship that he got there on, which was apparently on the 4th of November. I embarked with the consul for Cairo on board a fine galley. And then Pococke talks a little bit more about galleys and kind of how they're built. And then he talks a little bit about what happens when they get stuck, and how that's not all the way bad, because you get to see some of the geography of the Nile, which he then goes into, and I'm going to read a little bit now of that. The sailing on the Nile, so not if you stop, but just your general voyage on the Nile and kind of what you see. The sailing on the Nile is very pleasant. The country on each side is rich and fruitful. The villages having palm trees planted round them appear like so many fine groves, as when the country is overflown, they look like islands, as they really are. But Egypt appears in greatest beauty in the month of December, when it is the middle of the spring, and the whole country is covered with green corn and clover, and many plants appear in full blossom. If you do decide to read Pococke's account entire, just be aware that for a lot of the convention of spelling at that time, what appears to us as the letter F is actually S. So you'll see that a lot in Pococke's account, where, for instance, the word for sailing, which is where I kind of got tripped up there, it looks like it's spelled F-A-I-L I-N-G, but that F is actually an S, so it's actually S-A-I-L I-N-G. But then there's other times where what looks like an F is actually an F and not an S. So now I'm skipping ahead a little bit, and he's still talking about his sailing voyage to Cairo and sort of what it was like. And as I said, he made 2 voyages to Egypt. And so here he's making a reference to something that he actually did later, but he's going to describe it now. So this is in chapter 3, titled Between Dalmatia and Grand Cairo. Though I did not make a voyage on the eastern branch of the Nile till I left Grand Cairo to go out of Egypt, taking the same way again on my return into Egypt, yet I choose in this place to finish my account of Delta and the country about it. And so then the rest of chapter 3 goes into describing the geography of the Delta and how it looked again in roughly that second half of the 1700s. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit more because this is also the part of the publication where he talks about his visit to Memphis and the Giza Plateau area and kind of what he saw there, and Heliopolis as well. So this is now, he's talking about sailing up to Heliopolis on their way towards Cairo, kind of what that looked like. We passed the delta and sailed up the Nile towards Cairo, where it runs in one stream. To the east of the river, about a league, was the ancient city of Heliopolis, which is on of the scriptures and is now called Mater Rhea. It was a city of great antiquity and famous for the worship of the sun. They worshipped also a bull they kept here under the name of Menvis, as they adored that animal at Memphis by the name of Apis. The account of the first foundation of it by Actius, the son of Rhoda and the sun, and that he taught them astronomy, must be looked on as a fabulous account. So I think there he's saying that you probably shouldn't place a lot of belief in it. The small remains of this city are to the northeast of Cairo, which are represented in the 6th plate. So one of the highlights of Pococke's work and why it's so valuable to even Egyptologists of this current day is that he did a lot of sketches and drawings of what he saw, and because of his career, a lot of those drawings are very exact. So it's, again, a valuable detail into what a lot of these sites looked like back then, because a lot of the stuff that he saw and that he recorded has since been lost. So throughout this volume 1, Observations on Egypt, he'll reference different plates that he did within his work. A large mound encompasses the whole, the ancient site being about half a mile broad and a mile long. At the south end are 2 entrances, and at the west a large one, which might have been the ancient way to the temple, for near it are the ruins of a sphinx of a bright spangling yellow marble. It is about 22 feet in length, the ear is 2 feet long, and the head 4 feet broad. It has such a tutulus or ornament on each side of the head, channeled as the great sphinx at the pyramid has, with which the sphinx is commonly represented. This is marked A, i.e. A in that 6th plate. Near it is a piece of the same stone, with hieroglyphs cut on it. 16 paces to the north are several stones that seem to be the ruins of another sphinx. To the east are some others that might be part of 2 other sphinxes, and a large stone 6 feet long and 3 feet broad, adorned with hieroglyphs on one side. There is an obelisk remaining, marked B, almost opposite to the gate, but a little more to the south, as there doubtless was another to the north. I found by the quadrant that it was 67 feet and a half high, and that's another hallmark of Pococke's account, is that he has lots of these exact measurements that he did and that he then tells the reader. I found by the quadrant that it was 67 feet and a half high, so that, supposing it to be one of the 4 erected by Pococke, which were 70 feet high, and allowing 3 feet for the depth of the plinth it was let into, the ground has risen 7 feet and a half. And then he gives a little bit more measurements of the obelisk, and then how much the landscape has changed, which I'm going to read that part out, because again, it's interesting. Where is it? And it is discolored by the water to the height of near 7 feet. And then he gives a little bit more. It is well preserved, except that on the west side it is scaled away for about 15 feet high. To the north of this obelisk and of the place where the other may be supposed to have stood, the ground is very much raised, on which the ancient city might be built. To the south of the west entrance the earth has been cut away, and I saw a rusticated wall 3 feet 8 inches thick, but with 2 rows of stone in breadth, clamped together with irons. So I just thought that was a particularly interesting depiction of Heliopolis, which again is basically a suburb of modern Cairo. So a lot of what Pococke lost or saw there has since been lost. So now I'm skipping ahead a little bit more. And because one of the other things that he also does is he goes to the site of Saqqara and gives us some descriptions of what that area again looked like in roughly the second half of the 1700s. And he also goes to the Giza Plateau. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to that part. So that's chapter 5, which is titled Of Memphis and the Pyramids Near Cairo. It is very extraordinary that the situation of Memphis should not be well known, which was so great and famous a city, and for so long a time the capital of Egypt. But as many of the best materials of it might be carried to Alexandria, and afterwards, when such large cities were built near it as Cairo and those about it, it is no wonder that all the materials should be carried away to places so near and so well frequented. And the city being in this manner leveled, and the Nile overflowing the old ruins, it may be easily accounted for, how everything has been buried or covered over, as if no such place had ever been. There are 2 distances mentioned by Strabo in order to fix the situation of Memphis, and then he goes into detail about what those were and which one is more likely. So I'm skipping ahead a little bit. And then he goes into how well what he saw matches the Greco-Roman writers. So that's where I'm going to pick it back up. For at Moken, I saw some heaps of rubbish, but much greater about Metrahani, and a great number of grottos cut in the opposite hills on the east side of the river, which might be the sepulchres of the common people of Memphis, as those on the western hills were probably, for the most part, the burial places of their deities, their kings, their great people, and their descendants. I observed also a large bank to the south of Mitrani, running towards Saqqara, which may be the rampart mentioned by Diodorus Siculus as a defense to the city, not only against the overflowing of the Nile, but also against an enemy, and therefore must be different from that mentioned by Herodotus, as 12 miles and a half south of Memphis, by which the course of the river was turned, and consequently at that distance could not well be said to be a defense to the city. And then he gives a little bit about what Pliny said and kind of what he thinks of that. And then he delves a little bit more into, again, what the Greco-Roman writers say and how much he agrees with it or doesn't based on what he saw. And then he goes into what he saw the actual pyramids on the Giza Plateau. The most remarkable pyramids which are taken notice of by the ancients must, according to this account, so that's an account that he was talking about earlier, have been to the northwest of Memphis. They are called now the pyramids of Giza. So again, how I talked about how spelling changes. So by Giza, he means the site of Giza. So we spell it Giza. In this part of the account, it's spelled Gize. And according to this description of the ancients, are towards the brow of the hills. For the low hills extending to the southeast, on the west side of the delta, and near to this place, they here set out for about 2 miles to the east, and then running south, the pyramids are built towards the northeast angle. The hills being computed to be about 100 feet high above the plain, and are of such free stone as the pyramids are built with. On examining the pyramids and taking a view from the top of the Great Pyramid, I made the plan of them and the sepulchres about them in the 16th plate, and it was a considerable time after I left Egypt that I imagined some regularity might have been designed, if not on building the first great pyramid, yet at some time after. It may be when they began to build the second. And where I have supplied the plan to make it regular, I either suppose it to be destroyed, which is more likely, that it might be laid down as a plan by some king, to be executed by his successors. But as all this is pure conjecture, so everyone may judge as he thinks proper. The tombs about the Great Pyramid are distinguished from the small pyramids by their not being shaded. Most of those pyramids are very much ruined, and some of them I concluded to be so only from their being square, higher than the tombs, and having ruins about them. These tombs are oblong, square, solid buildings, raised 2 or 3 feet above the ground, and I saw in some of them holes filled up with sand, by which without doubt they descended to the apartments where they deposited the dead. These might be the sepulchres of the near dependents, or possibly of some of the relations of the kings, who were buried in the great pyramids, and it may be the relations buried under these small pyramids, which might be a distinction not permitted to any others. Those marked T, in the plate, in the 16th plate, are only holes, being probably tombs they had destroyed and dug down to see if they could find any treasures. And so then he goes a little bit into the type of stone that he saw, and sort of the construction of the pyramids, both from sources that he read and then from what he saw with his own eyes. So I think that's where I'm going to stop, because he does talk a little bit about how he saw the Sphinx and what it looked like at that point. But given that this video is already a little bit over 20 minutes, I think I'm going to do that section in a later video. So again, this is from Richard Pococke's a description of the East and some other countries. His observations on Egypt, which is volume 1. And I got this print publication from Abe Books, but I think you can also find Richard Pococke's volume 1 or 2, or maybe even both, on the Internet Archive as well. So until next time, bye!